When upgrading an electrical service to 200 amps, selecting the correct size grounding conductor is crucial for safety and compliance with the National Electrical Code, or NEC. The purpose of a grounding conductor is to provide a low impedance path for fault current to return to the source, allowing overcurrent protective devices like circuit breakers or fuses to quickly trip and clear the fault. This minimizes the risk of electrical shock and fire hazards. For a 200 amp service, the NEC specifies the minimum size grounding conductor based on the size of the service entrance conductors. However, since you are upgrading from a 150 amp service with a number 4 stranded conductor, we will determine the correct size based on the 200 amp service requirements. To determine the grounding conductor size, you need to refer to NEC Table 250.66. This table provides the minimum size grounding electrode conductor based on the size of the service entrance conductors. First, you need to determine the size of the service entrance conductors for your 200 amp service. Assuming you are using copper conductors, a 200 amp service typically requires 4/0 AWG copper conductors. Once you know the size of the service entrance conductors, you can look up the corresponding minimum size grounding electrode conductor in Table 250.66. For 4/0 AWG copper service entrance conductors, the minimum size grounding electrode conductor is number 4 AWG copper. Therefore, for your 200 amp service upgrade, you will need a minimum of number 4 AWG copper grounding electrode conductor. It is important to note that this is the minimum size required by the NEC. In some cases, it may be necessary to use a larger grounding conductor to meet local codes or specific project requirements. Also, the grounding electrode conductor connects to the grounding electrode system, which typically consists of a ground rod, ground plate, or underground metallic water pipe. The size of the grounding electrode conductor is determined by the size of the service entrance conductors, not the type of grounding electrode. When installing the grounding conductor, it is important to follow all applicable NEC requirements. The grounding conductor must be securely connected to both the service equipment and the grounding electrode. The connections must be made using approved methods such as listed connectors or exothermic welding. The grounding conductor must also be protected from physical damage. It is also important to ensure that the grounding electrode system is properly installed and maintained. Ground rod should be driven deep enough to reach permanent moisture, and ground plate should be buried below the frost line. Metallic water pipes should be bonded to the grounding system at the point where they enter the building. In addition to the grounding electrode conductor, there is also the equipment grounding conductor, or EGC. The equipment grounding conductor provides a path for fault current to return to the source from electrical equipment. The size of the equipment grounding conductor is determined by the size of the overcurrent protective device protecting the circuit. For a 200 amp circuit, the equipment grounding conductor must be at least number 6 AWG copper. It is important to use a correct size equipment grounding conductor to ensure that fault current can quickly and safely return to the source. This helps to prevent electrical shock and fire hazards. When installing the equipment grounding conductor, it must be connected to all metal parts of the electrical equipment, such as enclosures, conduit, and junction boxes. The connections must be made using approved methods, such as listed connectors or bonding jumpers. The equipment grounding conductor must also be continuous and unbroken from the equipment back to the service equipment. This ensures that there is a low impedance path for fault current to flow. In summary, when upgrading to a 200 amp service, the minimum size grounding electrode conductor required by the NEC is number 4 AWG copper, based on using 4/0 AWG copper service entrance conductors. The equipment grounding conductor for a 200 amp circuit must be at least number 6 AWG copper. Always refer to the latest edition of the NEC and local codes for specific requirements, and consult with a qualified electrician to ensure a safe and compliant electrical installation.